All right, so welcome everybody to the Media Services Worldwide podcast. Today we have a very interesting guest, an extremely innovative company that's really shaping both technology and fitness, as well as an entire social experience. I want to introduce you all to PingPod. Today we have two of the three founders, but we're going to address all three of the founders. But I want to make sure to introduce David Silberman. Now, David's the inventor of PingPod. He actually came up with the concept. He was looking for a small-scale, technology-enabled retail space table tennis studio that wouldn't have the burdens of employees. And this is coming from a guy who started his career at UBS as an equity and research analyst. So we're dying to kind of get into that story, how you transition from that type of operator to this PingPod inventor. Then we also have on with us Max Kogler. And Max was at one point the COO and CFO of Super Soccer Stars. And that was the preeminent youth soccer organization in the United States. And he spent over a decade in finance, including Goldman Sachs, but has been an operator for most of his career since then. So two very, very different career paths that come to a true passion. And we don't have on the phone the third founder, which is Ernesto Eboué. Now, Ernesto has deep roots in ping pong or table tennis. Ernesto is the former number one rated player in the US and six-time Philippine national champion. So he was also the founder of New York Table Tennis Academy and one of the handful of successful clubs in New York City today. So what a roster. We're so happy to have them here in our studio. So please, join me in welcoming both David and Max at PingPod. So gentlemen, thanks so much for joining. I'm glad you could make the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I know he's unfortunately not able to join us on the call today, but can we just get a little bit more background on Ernesto and what he's doing for PingPod and with the organization?
It's not coincidence that he made it to the top of a sport that, in Asia, that is dominated there. It's the number 5 most popular sport in the world. There are almost a billion people playing table tennis. And he has that winning mentality. There's never any excuses. There are never any, I can't do this or we shouldn't be doing this. It's always go, go, go. And, if we don't manage to do it, we'll try another way. He's also the only coach in the United States that is being sponsored by Butterfly, as far as I know. Butterfly is also our sponsor. And obviously, Ernesto put that connection together, the preeminent table tennis equipment.
Yeah, if I could just insert myself here. What I love about Ernesto's story is that he came from the Philippines, from a very humble beginnings, to say it lightly, and ping pong totally transformed his life. Like he found some raggedy table in the back of his school, and he became instantly he had this natural affinity and skill, and it ended up bringing him to the U.S., where he became the number one player in 2016. And being at the top of a major sport in the United States, you have to have certain qualities that he just has naturally. And he doesn't have necessarily the professional business background and degrees. And, Max has a fancy Stanford MBA, which actually has been awesome. But he is naturally a killer business person and just an all-around great person. I echo everything that Max said about his abilities to execute, and we just have so much respect for him.
David, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you. Inventing PingPod, that idea, that concept. So can you just tell me how you go from being an equity research analyst to a creator or an inventor of this unique concept? And we'll, of course, dive deeper into what that is. But what was the path that kind of led you here?
Yeah, no, happy to talk about that. So I'm a lifelong table tennis player, and I'm not professional, but I have played since I was 5 years old casually. And for several years now, since I moved to New York City, I just sensed a market opportunity, just really based on supply and demand in New York City. And, I had a corporate job at UBS in finance, and I learned a lot in that role. but I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and at heart wanted to do something more creative. So I had to go out and, take a risk, or I would never forgive myself. And so I quit my job without having any specific idea in mind of what exactly I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted it to be ping pong related, and I sensed that opportunity. And so I quit my job. I went to Peru for a few weeks just to reset. And in Peru, I had, I went into that trip with this idea of a large format table tennis store, which is the kind of traditional way that table tennis is brought to the world today. And when I came back from Peru, I was faced with the reality that a large, 20,000 square foot restaurant bar type of concept with ping pong would be extremely hard to execute. It would require a lot of capital, and it would require probably, some restaurant background and managerial experience. And that's not where I wanted to pursue my entrepreneurial goals. So the truth of the idea of PingPod really came from putting a capital constraint, right? If I don't want to raise $5 million, but I want to raise maybe $1 million, and also not wanting to have to be there all day long. That's not how I envisioned my entrepreneurial life, as having to kind of be in an establishment to oversee it all day long. Those two things, those two constraints yielded PingPod, which we will get into the concept more in a bit of what PingPod is, a small scale network of autonomous pods to play table tennis. But when I had that idea, it opened up so many opportunities for scale, for technology, for media, and it just got me really excited. And it had elements of the sharing economy, the gig economy, autonomy in retail, fitness, and so many other things. It just checked so many boxes of a compelling startup. So I ended up having a couple beers. This is over the summer in June of 2019 at a party, my sister's 30th birthday party. And I ended up yapping away about my ping pong idea. And sure enough, on Monday, I got a call from someone in the real estate world who said, you told me about your concept. I know 2 other people who are looking to get into the business. Those 2 people are Max and Ernesto. And when I met them at a lunch meeting, these 2 people are super impressive. They've been around the track. They're both, professional or semi-professional players with really amazing backgrounds. And so I knew I had to kind of impress them to get in the door with them, or else they would never want to, partner up with me and give me some equity in a business. So with the help of my cousin, I did a market research test, an MVP, a minimally viable product, where we took a table from Long Island to Canal Street in downtown Manhattan, and we threw the table in a garage for 10 days. And we started to sell street-level table tennis. And the demand was overwhelming. And just to kind of close out the story, Max and Ernesto saw what I did with that Canal Street test, and they kind of immediately fell in love. They saw the vision. I mean, it took a little bit of time, but eventually they saw it, and it was really off to the races with them.
Here we are. We've got David extremely excited. He wants to build this autonomous ping pong, destination. He's looking at scale, doesn't want all the traditional headaches that come along with staff and having restaurant management. He really, it sounds like, really wanted to focus on the purity of table tennis. And he's having this discussion at his sister's 30th birthday party. You get wind of it. Ernesto gets wind of it. What was it that attracted, you to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, Ernesto and I were already working simultaneously, completely separately from David and his cousin, on a very, very similar concept. Again, at that moment, it was still, bigger scale, large scale, 20,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet. And when we actually were connected to each other, it was only because the real estate people that we're both using, we're basically looking at the exact same type of footprint and looking to do something extremely similar. And we essentially were connected by the real estate person who was showing her 2 different groups, the same types of spaces. And so we obviously thought it might be a good idea to at least at least connect and, get to know each other. And David and his cousin were very, very keen to immediately sort of join forces. And, as David was mentioning, there was a little bit of a gap between us and, sort of actually merging. We were not as keen initially until David actually came to us with this idea of PingPod itself. And even through this process, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that as we kept talking to each other, it became very clear, very, relatively fast that they were to be taken seriously, that they were executors, that they are very smart, and they had the passion for it. This is extremely important. You can have fantastic ideas, and most ideas will fail on execution. And through this process of getting to know each other and then ultimately coming up with this idea, which was extremely creative, and actually thinking it through, even when the idea came up, I still had 100,000 questions about, well, how much is the space? And, if you have it ground floor, it's going to be more expensive. If it's small, it's going to be more expensive, and so forth. And then next thing, David whips out a model, and a model that's one of the best Excel models that I've ever seen, with all the numbers played through, all the economics, all the bells and whistles, and basically 4 different scenarios showing us that it's very tough to lose money in this. It's possible if you don't execute on it, but that the upside is extremely interesting, but more importantly, that it scales. And that's when all of a sudden for me, personally, I flipped the switch, and I really got excited about the concept. And, additionally, obviously working with David, someone who can not only come up with the idea, but also immediately produce.
When did PingPod become official? When did you guys, come on the board as an incorporated organization?
Yeah, so we met in June, and then in July, late July, we were an official corporation in the eyes of the federal government. And we worked really, really quickly, and with a fire under us to open our doors at a soft open in February, where we started to dribble in our friends and family and trusted people who we could, and on day one, we left customers alone in the pod with our security cameras and just checking in every once in a while. But we knew we could trust people close to us. And then we slowly started broadening our customer base to include people who we don't know, people who were noticing the pod in the neighborhood, local people who got extremely excited about the prospect of there being a table, and they've never seen anything like it, a table tennis table, sitting there in a glass, pod in this cool environment. And they started emailing us, and our backlog kind of started to grow and grow and grow. We kind of had to be selective and who first come, first serve. And but by mid-February, we were kind of doing it. Our model that had been an idea and a vision was coming to life, and that extended into March. And now we're facing a global pandemic, which we will definitely talk about. But I should also mention that we, when we met and we started, back in the summer, and we incorporated, we immediately started to raise money. And that's a whole other part of the story of the 3 of us coming together and building a plan and models and a presentation and going out to our friends and family and the ping pong community, who has been so supportive, and we're so appreciative to them. And raising a substantial amount of money, we're almost at $1 million in our pre-seed round, full transparency. So that's really exciting. We're armed with a lot of cash to get through this tough time. And I should also note that our round is still open. So it's an ongoing thing. We have a point in our mind that we'll close it down, but we're still kind of on the grind and building our business in the back end as well as the front end.
So break it down for me, because I hear people say we play ping pong. I hear people say table tennis. Is there a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we've heard this question many times. And even in our initial documents, we were actually using those two expressions interchangeably and on purpose. For us, there's definitely, it's a spectrum, right? When people start playing, or if they're looking at ping pong or table tennis as a game and as a social activity, they're more inclined to call it ping pong. If they're talking about the sport, the Olympic sport, it's table tennis.
So I love it.
And I would kind of say that ping pong is associated with what you do in your basement growing up, a hobby, something also that now is associated with, partying, lots of alcohol around, loud music, chaos around you. And so at the core, what we're doing with PingPod is bringing table tennis out of the basement and into the world, and displaying it by creating street level pods.
There you have it. Ping pong is being elevated by PingPod. Table tennis is becoming accessible. There's a path to it now. So yeah, I agree. Let's dive into the mission. So table tennis on demand. All right. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so the mission really is, and David already alluded to this, is to bring table tennis out of the basement into the world, but not only at one place, but in many different places, in many different locations. So at the core, and we said this earlier as well, we're a fitness and technology company that allows people to have their own personal table tennis table somewhere close in their neighborhood. Our long-term vision would be that if you want to play table tennis, you go on your app, you find the closest pod that's close to you. You shouldn't have to walk more than 2 blocks away from your house, and you find someone to play with also online very easily. Or you bring your friend, of course, and there you have it. It's basically your own personal table tennis table, your own personal gym, right next door. And so, that's super important, that it's easily accessible, both from a physical point of view, it'd be physically close, and that it's also very easy to book. And that's obviously where the technology comes in. And we also talked about there not being any employees, or very few employees. Yeah, it's automated. It's as automated as it gets. So, for example, when you get the reservation, the booking, that reservation can be used as a key, essentially. You have it on your phone, you click your reservation on the phone, and the door will unlock automatically for you to get in. Of course.
Wow. So Max, let me just pause you right there, because this might be a lot for somebody to digest, because this is a new way of thinking. When people are hearing technology and fitness, right? And they're thinking about the two together. Names that come to my mind are Peloton, the Mirror. Now I've even seen floating around on my Instagram, there's an app to help kids with their dribbling skills. That's app driven and AI, augmented. But this is different, because all three of the companies I just mentioned, it's really for an individual. This has, a social component at its core. And then on top of it, I just want you to dive a little deeper into that automation, because you said it so seamlessly. You go on your app, you find a pod, you find a place close to you, and you basically have access, which is, to a location, which we know space is at a premium, especially in most cities today, in New York especially. So can you just walk us through, how that technology, how this is being built, and how a person would actually take advantage of this, the technology, with them, with their friends, or even looking for that social engagement? How does PingPod really bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we very much differ from the three that you mentioned, in that we use technology to bring people together physically. So in this day and age where people don't leave their couch when they go and try to find a mate, for example. If you're trying to meet someone, you do it online, right? You swipe and you don't even go, you don't actually physically go anywhere. And until, hopefully at one point you'll meet that person. But there's so many things that are happening online, and there's so much social activity that's not really social if you think about it, right? But there's a little bit of a movement towards engaging with people again. And, the irony of this is not lost on me that we're all sitting, isolated right now. But I think, especially when this situation is over, I think you will see the premium that's put on physical contact with people. Even if they're a few feet away from each other. But I think mankind needs it, and we need it, and that's what we want to facilitate. Actually, using the technology to find each other in a physical space that is, neighborhood friendly, that's social, that builds some sort of community. That's how we want to use the technology, not to stay apart, but to bring us together.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Max. And I just want to harken back to kind of how I originally came upon the concept. You notice that retail is dying to some degree in New York City, at least traditional old school brick and mortar by way of Amazon and e-commerce, of course. However, the retail concepts that are thriving in New York City and beyond are the experiential. You physically go there to rock climb, to axe throw, to play table tennis, to go bowling, all of it to spin. The cycling concept, not the ping pong facility, is massive, and all of these things that bring people together. There's such a need and a lack of things to do, of physical activities in New York City. And as a millennial, I struggled with that living in New York City, of just not enough things to do. And my friends in LA have, more going on. They go on hiking, and sometimes you can just feel really, like starved for something to do with other people that's physical, that's fun, that doesn't necessarily involve alcohol. And so when I did the Canal Street pop-up, I saw the amazing demand for right off the street, people willing to pay, all sorts of money for 30 minutes, an hour of play, tourists, and there was no pattern to the demographic. It was everyone. It was all ages and socioeconomic backgrounds and genders and physical ability and skill type. And so that's what got me so excited. Was I was kind of like, wow, this is an epiphany moment, because there's just, people saw the table and they were like, oh my God, I haven't played table tennis in 10 years since I lived in the suburbs. There's nowhere to play, or it's not affordable to play. And they just got so energized and excited by the prospect of playing right on the street in a garage with no bells and whistles. And so, I said, we gotta take this forward.
So I appreciate you giving us that color, because it really seems, when you say that you're in New York looking for something to do, I think people outside of New York are going to wonder if that's the craziest statement they've ever heard. But then when you further qualify that, David, because, and you said active when you compared it to LA, that was critical. That was a key point. What you guys are doing that's interesting and that I really love, and I'm kind of hearing as the overarching theme, is not only are you bringing technology and fitness together, but you're creating a social environment. Typically, the social platform, when we think of social media, it's two people interacting with each other, nowhere near each other, typically indoors. Social media is absolutely the antisocial in many cases. But here you're innovating social, using technology, but you're also building a community within communities, not behind closed doors, but visibly. You want people to see what's happening. So can you kind of walk me through that a little bit, please, David and Max? I'd love to hear, even before we dive into the technology, because I know you have another brilliant person that's on your team that came on board and responsible for the tech build out. But before we touch on that, just talk to me about the visibility. You mentioned how it went in Canal Street at the pop-up, but why is that visibility so important to PingPod for people to physically be able to look through the window and see people play?
It's very important for us that the pods inside, they're futuristic and modern and yet cozy. And part of the future there is that we have a lot of monitors. We allow people to use, to essentially in some pods bring their own music as well. And obviously that's where Media Services Worldwide has been super helpful. And, you guys have done a fantastic job outfitting the two of our pods so far already. And the whole idea there is, for example, that if two people are playing and they have an amazing rally, they want to see it again, they can immediately go on their app, they can click a button, and there will be live action replay on that screen right there next to them. And immediately, obviously, they get a link sent to them where that's going to be kept for them for the future to show to their children how amazing they played, or if they're disputing whether a ball hit the edge or not, right? So we're using technology in that sense as well, also physically right there, integrated with the experience itself. And of course, we have coaches and we have coaching sessions, and people can get automatically recorded through a camera system and so forth. And ultimately, though, in terms of the concept, we really try to provide a superior table tennis experience, right? Which means that, of course, it should still be fun. It should be social for people that want to use it as play, but also for players that are quite serious about it, for players that have already made that journey to table tennis. In fact, we're sponsoring Canuck Jaw, who is number 25 in the world at this point, and he's really excited to come and play at our club. And this is why the street level view and seeing it from the outside is so important, because people are actually going to start to realize that this is a real sport. And I don't know, Trevor, if you've ever seen two professionals play, close up.
Not in person, never. I would love to.
It's an incredible thing. It's truly mind-blowing. You don't even realize what's going on. And in fact, already in the month that we've been open, we've had dozens of people peeking inside our pod when there are two people playing that were okay players. And at one point we had the number 3 player from Scotland here, and he was playing with Ernesto. And, there was like lines of kids lined up, putting their heads against the window, just in awe. And that's the kind of sport it is. And that's why it's important for us to bring it up, to show it to the people. And I think this in itself, is obviously marketing, but at the same time, we have a bigger mission here. The mission is to really, and David said it, right, bring table tennis out of the basement to the world.
That's huge. If we can just talk a little bit about the technology, because I know that we didn't mention, we kind of glazed over it a little bit. This is being driven by technology. There's software that's behind the actual tangible experience itself. Can we just talk about how that was developed, kind of who was involved, how it was created, and what that means for every guest of PingPod, everyone who walks into a pod to have that experience, how this was curated, how it was developed, and how it really enhances the experience? David, Max, please.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you're asking that question. In terms of our history, we kind of got sidetracked a little bit here. As soon as we got together and we incorporated David, Ernesto, and I, we actually joined forces with Christine Cha. Christine became, essentially came on board as a partner, and she's really been responsible for the entire tech build out, the software, the front end, the back end. And, in general, she plays a very, very pivotal role with us. She's been driving all the design, all the UX. And, when we talk about UX, user experience, that's what's so important, is that you use technology to make things easier. In a lot of cases, technology makes things harder, right? It gets more complicated. Whoa, now I have to go to my computer. I have to do this, log in. I have to do all kinds of crazy things. with us, we are trying to make it as easy as possible, as seamless as possible. So, if you kind of run through how this should work, how does it actually work to go, and play? All you need to do is really create a simple login. That's a email and a password. That's it. You're in. You have a profile, and then you pick a pod that's close enough to you, or close to you, of course. And right now, I should say, of course, we're starting out with the first pod. So, right now it's really just one neighborhood that's that you can pick. But down the road, of course, that's the most important part. You pick one that's close on a map. Then you pick the time you want to play. And then you book. Obviously, at that point, you need a credit card. You put your credit card in, and you're off to the races. You go there. You use your reservation on your phone as your unlocking mechanism, as your key. Paddles, balls, tables, everything is there. You literally just have to show up. And in fact, you can even show up by yourself. We also have a way to play against the robot. If you just want to get some exercise in, obviously that's less social. Or you bring a friend, or 2 or 5, or you actually match with someone of your own skill level. And that's something that we're in the process of building, but down the road, you're going to be able to pick to play with someone that is vetted by us, of course, as part of our system. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need to find someone to play with. Of course, we also have drinks and snacks and, even merchandise. If you actually want to play with better balls or with a better racket, we can provide all of that to you. And that entire experience is also very safe. We have it monitored 24/7. And there's an intercom system, and we make sure that everybody stays safe. We essentially have a panic button just in case, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's very easy. It's very seamless. And
Max, sorry about that. I just want to jump in and make a kind of unrelated but related point and mention the diversity of our team. Between the 4 of us, we span 3 continents, different religions, different generations, and both genders. And I've noticed that there's a kind of checks and balances system that a diversity of backgrounds and thoughts brings to the team that we use when we, say, are building our software, building our technology to create the most efficient and robust and safe and comfortable system, both on the back end and the physical space itself. So when you were talking about the professional atmosphere, super important that it feels very comfortable, very safe, that it can work autonomously, that it's robust, that we kind of predict human behavior and try and get ahead of problems before they happen and think of solutions. And together, given our wide array of backgrounds, I really want to make it a point that has been extremely helpful. And it's not just a talking point in an academic class or something. It's really true.
Thank you both, David and Max, for breaking that down, because as you're talking, I'm sure our listeners are thinking $1 million questions. So this cool location, we know where it is. Obviously, we've seen it, and I can tell you firsthand. There's a lot of thought to put behind every item that's in that pod. To make it very comfortable, to make it very professional, to make you feel like you're in a cutting edge space. But it's all focused around the game of table tennis. And I think it's fantastic. But just tell us, and then we're going to touch on something that you brought up before then. So where is this location, this amazing location that we'd love to get everybody out there to see at some point?
Yeah, so I'll just round it out. We should have mentioned a lot earlier, but we are in the Lower East Side / Chinatown of Manhattan on 40 Allen Street is the entrance to the ground floor. And then, as I think we mentioned, we have a second floor with 3 additional tables. That's a separate entrance on Allen Street. It's 44 Allen Street.
There you hear it. 40 Allen Street, 44 Allen Street. Yeah, you've got a first floor and a second floor location on the Lower East Side of New York. It's an incredible place. And if you can walk by, take a look, you'll see the activity. But let's address the elephant in the room, if I may, gentlemen. Because as you mentioned, David, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? COVID-19, if you're listening to this a few months from now, hopefully we're on the other side of this. If you're listening to this, currently, this situation that we're in right at the moment. And, COVID-19 has, put a word into the consciousness of the people all over the globe, has put a phrase of social distancing, which has obviously impacted a number of businesses, a number of our social experiences. But, one thing that I can say that I'm very pleased to hear is how conscious PingPod is in regards to this, how responsible you guys have been as a company. And I'll say thank you because there are companies out here doing the responsible things, and you guys are one of them. So if we could just kind of work a little backwards, just, give us how you're operating right now, what your thoughts are on the current situation with this pandemic, and how this is going to look for PingPod moving forward.
Actually, on March 18th, we had just received our actual flooring, and we were moving to open beta. And so we saw our thing come to fruition, and then obviously closing it is heartbreaking. But at the same time, it's of course the right thing to do. And we're in a very fortunate position that we had raised enough money for us to get through this, and we have quite some leeway, or quite some time for us to get in any trouble at all. So and so let me, if you think about this kind of setup, right, we have to be forward looking as well, which is when the world hopefully goes back to relatively normal. Many people are saying this is not going to be the same world anymore. People are still going to be a little bit weary of, crazy situations where a lot of people are in one place, or bars, or, or concerts, or any other type of activity. But this is the kind of activity that kind of walks that fine line between, you're active, you're social, you're in a community, etc., but you're not stuck on top of each other. And you can do certain things, for example, biking and spinning, right? You kind of share the same materials. You sit on the same equipment, right? Here, you can bring your own paddle. You can even bring your own balls. In fact, we even have a ball rotation that we put together, which is essentially after every day, the balls go get disinfected, and then they move to the second position. We use a second set of balls and so forth, and they kind of rotate them around every 3 days. So you can create this pod in a very, very safe fashion, even in a pandemic fear-induced environment.
I'm glad you touched on that, and thank you for bringing clarity to that, because it is true. PingPod is actually geared for the way people are going to be thinking in the future when this is all over. And it's still critical for individuals to get out, to socialize, to exercise. But you've also done, and it's commendable, you did the responsible thing ahead of the time, because if you're going to discuss community, then you had to show that you were being responsible toward the community. So, we definitely commend you, and I'm sure many people appreciate that. And just to highlight the situation on where we are today, just think about this. We would love to be doing our podcast typically around a table with Max and David and I sitting there looking each other, in person, really enjoying each other. But today the world is a virtual world at this very moment in time. So you may hear a little bit of feedback. You may hear a barking dog. You may hear, but that's life right now. The good news is, and the good news that PingPod brings to the table is that life will continue with the luxuries and the amenities and the engagement that we so long for right now. And those luxuries and amenities are contact, competition, fitness, challenging ourselves. And I've got to say, PingPod has opened my eyes and the eyes of the entire media services team, and I'm sure the eyes of all of our listeners and ears, to the fact that this is different than what we grew up with, but this is going to be something that our kids are going to know. And that's something very cool. Before we wrap up, I just want to reach out again, just talk to you and Dave. What would you like, just to give you the open forum, David and Max, what would you like our listeners to know most importantly about PingPod, where it is now and where it's going to be in the future?
We're just, keeping our heads down, being patient, trying to be good, members of the community, good stewards of capital to our investors, and adhere to ethical values. And we believe that we're optimistic that the world is going to return to normal. It'll be a gradual process. We're not going to snap our fingers, but I think that PingPod will be a great stepping stone for people to get back to being comfortable being around one another in a large enough room where you can easily keep 6, 10, 15 feet apart. In fact, a table is 10 feet long anyway, so you're kind of restricted by that. And come together and be social and adhere to social distancing for a while until we get to a vaccine, which we will. And so we're excited to once again open our doors to the world. We hope very, very soon, but we're going to be mindful and monitor the situation very closely. We also have the unique ability to limit the group size that comes in, and we're just counting down the days and continuing to execute. And in terms of the meat of your question about future state, I know Max gets really excited talking about the technology, and then we touched on a lot of it and what we will be able to do in the future. I'll let him kind of close it out with that high and optimistic note.
So yeah, future state. I mean, there's some extremely exciting things that we're working on. Obviously, I already spoke about the live action replay. I can't tell you how many times I have played since we had mentioned this to some people in the community, to some of our investors and people that have come to the pod, that we're going to have live action replay. And in every game, 2, 3, 4 times, people say, "Oh my God, I wish I had live action replay right now." And then, I would definitely pay $5 to see this point again. And then the opponent inevitably says, "And I would pay $10 not to see it," right? And so people get very excited about this part, and as do I, because I'm part of this community, the table tennis community. I've made that journey already, and I got very excited when we had a good rally. And I think that's what it's all about. That's what life is about creating these experiences that are healthy and good for you. We talked about addiction. There's so many people addicted to all kinds of things that are really not good for you. Even when we talk about the youth right now, it's, playing video games or staying inside, getting on social media, there's, getting away from your phone, all of these things. And being addicted to table tennis is definitely, the good kind of addiction, if you can call it addiction as such. And so the other thing that we are working on is, and I also spoke about this briefly, is a matching. It's a matching engine for players, right? So we're going to have the unique ability to essentially rate and rank players as well. We, of course, are going to provide, there's going to be leagues and ladders and tournaments and all kinds of ways for people to compete if they want to. Nobody has to. But ultimately, we're going to have a way for us to match players with each other. And that obviously creates an additional bridge between people and for communities and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's this last part, which is really near and dear to my heart, which is like we are going to have classes, but not just for anybody, also for kids. And I think it's really important that kids get exposed to kind of these healthy types of addictions, early in their lives, and for them to hold, I know it from my own super son, for them to hold a table tennis racket or a ping pong paddle in their hands and try to hit those balls, and you see the smiles in their faces. Those are amazing moments. And, during my time at Super Soccer Stars, that's the thing that drove me there. It's that you give kids something that they can really hold on to and grow up with. And who knows, ultimately down the line, they might take it more seriously or not. But But either way, it's healthy. It's good for them. It's also in some ways good for the parents. But so yeah, those are the things that we're working on, and we will be offering. As I mentioned, the recording of the sessions, the live action replay, obviously facilitated through Media Services Worldwide. Thanks again, guys. We can't wait to actually make that happen. The screens look absolutely fantastic.
Our hearts go out to all the people impacted by COVID-19, and we want to, give a nod to the healthcare community in New York City and beyond. You truly are heroes, as well as everyone who's continuing to work, from grocery store clerks to laundry mat people who are just continuing to do their thing so that we can all benefit and have our essentials, which is why they're called essential workers during this crazy time. I want to also mention that we believe disruption creates opportunities for those who do stay focused and stay committed to what they love and their passions. And, we will be back. We will be stronger than ever. And we're gonna bring table tennis on demand. And we're coming to a neighborhood near you.
Well, I think I couldn't think of a better way to close that out, David and Max. I really appreciate, number one, your time. Of course, your community involvement and your commitment to the community beyond table tennis, beyond ping pong, but really establishing PingPod as something that we can look forward to doing, look forward to being involved in, innovative. It's extremely thoughtful. It's also very healthful, taking technology, marrying it with fitness, and then creating a social community around it. Tremendous. It's brilliant thinking. I'm sure our listeners absolutely appreciate it. We appreciate it. And on behalf of Media Services Worldwide and all the Media Services Worldwide podcast listeners, David, Max, Ernesto, and Christine, we want to wish you guys the utmost success in everything you do. We look forward to hearing from updates. We'd love to have you back on the show to give us an update after all this and to see where we're growing and to discuss your new locations and these classes and to really learn more about the success stories that we're certain will result in this amazing company that you've built. So thank you for making PingPod a part of this podcast. And we look forward to seeing what the future holds. We know it's going to be a bright one. So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I echo that. This was awesome. Thank you.